Shut up and sit down.
Welcome to the Takeover Tuesday podcast. My name is David Allen, and once again, I am without Carlos Redlick. He will return in a future episode and many episodes. But this week, we have Jonathan Rivera, a podcasting maven from thepodcastfactory.com. We've been talking a little off air so far, so let's dive right into it.
So tell us how, I sort of read the little bio. I know a little bit about you from the show and so forth, and several shows. Maybe started at the early start of your entrepreneurial career and sort of bring us up to speed for those people who aren't as familiar with you. You started as an electrician, I believe.
I'm ashamed of that. Don't go sharing that story with people. Yeah. So I did 9 years after high school. I was an electrician for 9 years, and I didn't like it. I hated working for the man. I hated being out in the Florida sun, burning my butt off and sweating, and just I hated everything. And I made a change. I jumped into real estate. I like to say I shed the blue collar for a white collar. I jumped in. I made a bunch of money, lost a bunch of money, learned some valuable lessons, rebuilt, and nowadays I have my real estate rental business still popping. We have a waiting list. We have people lined up, and it's all because of the education I got from my mentors on copywriting, salesmanship, and positioning and all that sort of stuff. That's the people I talk to at the podcast factory. And now, since I have so much free time, I'm doing air quotes, by the way, free time.
Free time.
Yeah. Now,
stuff, of course.
Right. Of course. Yeah. So I got my real estate business dialed in, and then I just like to tell people nowadays, they ask me what I do, and I tell them, well, I spend my days talking to my mentors. And so that brings us up to today.
Well, that is awesome, man. It sounds like you've been through quite the journey. I know when I was catching up on your bio a bit, you'd sort of started into the real estate market, and then I guess when the housing crisis occurred, that was probably an issue as well for you, since your business at the time was based on rental housing and so forth.
Yeah, it was more that I started in my real estate career wanting to be a landlord, and that's a whole long story. But then I saw how much people were making flipping properties, so I started selling everything. And when everything turned, we got caught holding a ton of property, and I lost my ass.
Right. So something that I think everyone on this show, everybody we've interviewed on this show has at least attempted, myself included, other entrepreneurial, if not many entrepreneurial avenues, and they sort of always knew they wanted to be an entrepreneur and work for themselves, because either they were a terrible employee, as I can admit to, or they just couldn't quite find their footing, exactly what they wanted to do to work for themselves, but they tried a number of things. So you obviously still have a real estate business you've built back up again and stuff. What are some of the things you learned and just having to start from scratch again in that business?
The good part was I was broke before I started, so when I went broke again, it was cool. I've been there, done that. So that was fun, but it really led me to some different things, and really where I am today has a lot to do with that huge failure. But I'm a guy who loves to study. I love to learn. Now, not when I was in school. See, when I was in school, I was a straight D student, and I had to take summer school to graduate high school. So I wasn't really a fan of learning. But after getting my butt cooked in the Florida sun for 9 years, I was like, damn, I got to get out of here. And my escape route was reading, doing lots of reading, and I read a lot of books on real estate investing and investing techniques. And that was what gave me the courage to leave my job. But the problem was that I didn't really study business. I didn't know anything about marketing. I didn't really know anything other than what I had read about real estate investing. So I attribute that lack of knowledge, that lack of information, to the huge failure I had in that first business because I spent a lot of time working inside the business. See, I just created a new job for myself. I was rehabbing houses, I was putting on tools, and I was going in there and doing work like a dummy
Right.
instead of making the deals happen. And so I learned that lesson. I appreciate it. And nowadays you can't catch me doing any of that stuff because I know it's not the highest and best use of my time. But one of the best things that came out of that was I was in a 2-year funk after I failed that business. I went back to the drawing board and someone had introduced me to audiobooks. And from audiobooks, I learned about podcasts. And then when I jumped into podcasts, I learned all sorts of stuff about being an entrepreneur, having a business, doing marketing, and all this cool stuff that I never really knew. And I took that into my next venture to make it what it is today. It's a successfully running real estate business where I don't even work 4 hours a week on it, and it still just runs.
That's awesome. That is really good. That's good to hear. I know we've had a few people on the show who have similar stories of where, and I've heard similar stories of where people have built up a really thriving business of some sort, be it real estate or I remember hearing a story about Jordan Belfort and his first efforts were like in a meat business, like door-to-door meat selling, and the same thing happened. And I had the same thing happen to me. I had a sort of a small run fitness business where I was doing personal training back in my 20s, and I didn't know anything about business either. And it sort of cost me, where the business sort of slipped out from under you, where you had no real business training as to how to get it all together and running smoothly. So you eventually progressed onto podcasting, which is what I know you for. And some of the people who are probably listening to this know you for now, because I'm sure some of our listeners listen to Ben's podcast and Igor's podcast. And what was your first podcast, and how did you get started in that?
So let's go way back, because it sure is easy to look at what I'm doing now and say, damn, this guy's got it dialed in. But if we go way back to when I started, I was podcasting back in 2009. And that was back when you had to take that iPod thing, and you had to download stuff to your computer and plug it in and hopefully sync up. All that crap. You had limited memory.
I did all that, yeah.
that was where I started. And so I did. Back then, I did my first show. I took it to about 77 episodes, nearly 2 years of shows, and I learned a lot, had a lot of cool guests, didn't make any money, had to leave that behind. Then I did another run a year later with a partner of mine, and we did 30 shows, and this time I was really smart. This time I was going to outsource stuff. Well, outsourcing costs money. And I wasn't making any money, so that one failed.
Right. News flash.
Yeah. Surprise. And so then we go further in, and the same guy that I did that show with, that was Marketing and Productivity Radio. He came back to me maybe a year and a half later. He's like, you want to do a show? And I'm like, no, go away. But the thing about him is that he was a really great mentor for me. And so when I was goofing off on social media and blogging and all that stuff, he was like, listen, get your head out of your ass and focus on your real estate business. And I'm like, yeah, okay, head removed from ass, focusing on real estate business. And that proved to be really, really important, because if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. So I was grateful, and I wanted to have a way to work with him. We were doing a coaching program together, and we found that there was some need in our group for certain stuff. And so I came up with what I call the no money down podcast model. Now, you've heard of that in real estate, but I brought that to podcasting. I should slap a TM right on that.
Yeah, no doubt.
So I came up with the idea that we would first put together a product, and we knew what people wanted because they were telling us in the coaching class or the coaching group, and we knew what they wanted. So I'm like, all right, Darren, we're going to do this, but here's how we're going to do it. We're going to first come up with a product concept. Then we're going to sell said concept. And if people buy it and we have enough money, then we will fund our podcast. I'm not going to lift a finger. All I'm going to do is talk, but I have to put together the team. It worked out. We had enough to do our first 10 shows, and boom, in the first year of that business, that was Making Agents Rich with Darren Persinger. In the first year, we were both drawing a salary. We were both making money. It was profitable. And then it just happened by accident, man.
Wow,
I'm telling you.
That's awesome.
I'm like you. I'm a fan of Ben Settle, and I'm on his email list. I read his emails, and one day it was like New Year of 2014 or something. He's like, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. I jumped on him. I'm like, I got you, bro. I got you. Let's do this. And we had worked together before, so that's how we knew it would be okay. And from there, we did his show, and then we started doing other shows. I got in with Doberman Dan, Jim Yagi, and all these guys that are my mentors. I was like, hell yeah, I'll help you get out there because they had helped me so much that I was keen to help them, but not just that. Also, the help that I received when I was down in the dumps and I wasn't doing well and I got from podcasts, I'm giving back to the community by bringing the best, brightest minds I know and letting them sit in on these conversations.
No, that's great. I think that's the real value of the podcasting. It's so accessible. I mean, video is great. I like video, but I got really into listening to podcasts because I was working at a job at the time where I could just, like you said, the old school way of putting them on your iPod, or in that case it was my phone, I guess. And I would drive around all day. I worked for a real estate sign company at the time, and I would just listen to those podcasts all day. I don't remember. I think Kevin Smith's podcast was probably the first podcast I ever heard.
Wow.
The director, Clerks or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then business ones. I'm not sure which business ones came first in my sort of chronology, but I quickly started listening to a bunch of them, and I sort of started paring them down based on who resonated with me. And Ben was one of those people when his podcast eventually came out that I'd already known about, so that became an easy listen for me. How did you and Ben first connect? You said you were familiar with each other before the show.
Yeah, so I credit Ben for saving my internet business because before Ben, BB, before Ben, I was lucky to make $1,000 online a month, and it was just so much freaking work, and I hated it. But I
Right.
really wanted this idea of freedom to be a reality, and I met Ben, and it just totally hit me like a sack of bricks. It was like, oh, write email every day and pitch. Okay.
It seems so simple when I heard, because Matt Fury was the first person I ever heard, and he was talking about if he wasn't so lazy, he would send 3 a day or something like that. And I was like, yeah, man, what am I doing?
Yeah. So I got Ben's free copy, and anybody could get it. It's bensettle.com. He gives you a free copy of its email players newsletter. Normally costs $97 a month, but I got the free copy and I took it for a test drive. I said, all right, I'm going to sit here. I'm going to write emails. And it was excruciating. At the time, it would take me like an hour to write an email, and I was
Right.
pulling my hair out, hating life until I started making sales.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, all right, it works. And in that first week, I made like $1,100, which was more than I made in a month of doing things my way. And that just started a shopping spree. I'm like, this is house money. I started buying all of Ben's stuff.
Right.
And so I got down on all his stuff, started doing his thing 5 days a week. In fact, nowadays, last year I emailed my list 365 days, and I'm going to do that again this year. But it just sent me on that path. And so I was really grateful. And I told him, I'm like, Ben, I want you to know, you don't know me, you don't know anything about me, but I know you, and I downloaded your thing, and it really helped me. I made money. Thank you so much. Changed everything for me. And I started buying, at the time, he had some high dollar products, even like $800, $900 products. I used the house money to pick that up and just started using everything I learned. And then I would just keep in touch with him when I had successes. And eventually, I saw an opportunity. He used to have a prostate business, and I was doing some work in video. And I'm like, "Hey, you want me to make some videos for you? Let's use some of your emails and turn them into videos." And he's like, "Sure, why not?" Because he already knew that I did stuff, and that worked out. I made 10 videos for him. He liked them. He was happy with that. So I already proved to him that I was a doer, that I was reliable. And so when this came up, it was just like, "Yeah, let's do it." There was no questions asked.
Awesome. That's a really good story. Yeah, I think at the risk of this becoming Ben Settle Show Part 2, I would say that anyone who doesn't know Ben or doesn't have some of his stuff or looked at his stuff, you're really missing out, because what I liked about Ben's stuff, which sort of followed on from my experience with Matt Fury's materials, which were the simplicity of it. I think a lot of people that get into marketing online and stuff like that just get bogged down with a lot of analysis, a lot of planning. It seems overwhelming because there's so many different things it seems like, but really it's very simple. I think Ben's a master at, saying, look what I'm doing. Keeping this very simple. We had a guy on here a couple weeks ago, Luke Corden, who's a copywriter in the UK, and he has a similar model where he just has the one product right now, and he's just keeping it very simple. And for people starting out, I think that's very important. What were you selling at the time, Jonathan? You had a podcasting thing, or?
No, actually, back then, and I just let go of this business starting this year, but I was in the real estate training space
Oh, okay,
forever. I mean, I
right,
had a
makes sense.
huge Facebook group with like 75,000 members, and I had different stuff catered towards real estate agents. And so I was just selling little things, but it was, and look, this is more than just Ben Settle. This is for the
Yeah,
listeners out there. They are, look, there's gurus out there that know that people get bored. They don't use what they learn, and they have to keep coming up with new shit every week. And that's why we hear funnels and high ticket coaching and back end blueprints and all that. But really, you don't need all of that to make a living. I met a guy the other day, and I'm friends with him now, and all he has is one product. He is Tim Mitchum from Piano Fool. He runs pay per click to an opt-in page, and then he's got sales emails behind it and a $97 course. He still has a job, and he does 100K on the side with just that.
nice. Yeah, that's very inspirational. So people listening to this, I mean, it can happen very. I hesitate to say easily because people don't like to hear that. I think they say, "Oh, it's so easy." It's very simple, though.
Yes, it can be very simple. It's only as complicated as you make it.
That's right. And you can always, I'm a big proponent of getting stuff out there sort of in a, done is better than perfect kind of way. And then you can always fill the rest in later. I think that's something that people really bogs them down too, is these sort of like, it's got to be just right before I release it to the world because of the judgment factor or whatever. We've all
Just
been there.
wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
You're just wrong there. If you check out Sean D'Souza Psycho Tactics, he's got a show called The 3 Month Vacation. And I think it's somewhere around 15, 16, 17 where he talks about 70%. And just put out 70% done. It's better than not being done. And you can increase by adding versions, version 1, version 2, version 3, iterations. But just get it out there.
Absolutely. And Sean will actually be on this show in a few
Well, I
about.
know all the boys, huh?
Yeah, you know everyone. You've done that clearly. So, in your current iteration, how many podcasts are you working on and with other people?
Oh, wow.
Yep.
So hang on a second. I wasn't prepared for this. This is one that I should have been prepared for. But I co-host right now 5 shows. I've got another one coming up with Kevin Rogers that we're doing. So that will be out in the next couple weeks. So that'll be 6 shows I co-host. And then behind the scenes, I work on another 6 or 8. I don't know. I added like 2 new clients last week. It was a good week, but it's growing every day. So at least 12, 13 shows that I'm working on.
So that's basically, I mean, like you said, your real estate business is humming along almost without you. So you have the time. You've freed yourself up to do all these co-hosting on these podcasts and so forth. So that's most of your days are made up of this kind of stuff, I presume.
I'm a greedy little pig. I just want to speak to my mentors. All right. So that's what it's about. It's me saying, like, if there's anything, and I'm a strategic coach now, Dan Sullivan, and it's like trying to find that one thing. And the one thing that I could do that I've always done for years is just talk to people who are my mentors. In real estate, I did it, in real estate investing and real estate sales. I love hanging around older people, usually listening to their stories and learning from them. And if there's one thing that I could do all the time is just talk to people I like. And so I'm really focusing on just talking to people I like.
Yeah, it really sounds like that's exactly what you're doing. Now, for people, I've had a few questions. I mean, we're just basically getting this show up and running too. I think will be our 22nd or 23rd episode by the time this airs. We made the first 5 or 6 sort of in like the most rough hewn fashion, of course, possible, in the noisy cafes and stuff.
Good.
We got it
Could
out
only
there
get better.
It's quick and dirty, as they say.
Yeah.
But for some other people, I've had questions people ask me now, of course, about podcasting because they're looking into it. But I think you're a lot more qualified, perhaps, than myself. Tell us some of the beginner mistakes people make, because I know I've made a bunch, and sort of where people should cut the learning curve down.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked that, David. And I'm going to, since I know that you have had plenty of copywriters on your show, your audience may or may have not heard of Gary Halbert.
Yeah, I mean, if people haven't heard of Gary Halbert, I probably mentioned his name, and now you've mentioned his name on basically every show we've done, because he is actually how I got started in copywriting. I've told the
Nice.
story very basically in other formats, and we'll probably tell it in a more fleshed out fashion eventually. But I was sold a bodybuilding product when I was 19. That ended up years later. When I was looking to get into online business and learning more about online business, I found out that it was written by Gary. And I can still feel, even to this day, even in time I tell this story, I can still feel, because back then you had to wait 6 weeks to get something in the mail.
Yeah.
It wasn't like digital stuff these days. And I remember reading through the sales, material, and thinking, oh man, this is, bullet points and stuff. It's like, oh man, this is going to be in there. And I'm going to learn this. I'm going to learn about this, and the 3 things you should never do, and when you're in the gym or whatever it was. And I could still, when I found out it was Gary, I was like, oh man, that is still so tangible. I can feel the hairs on the back of my neck actually standing up a little bit, because it was so real, and he entered the conversation I was already having in my head, as they say.
Yeah.
So yeah, Gary. So anyways, continue. Yeah.
That's an amazing story, actually. I'm glad I got to hear that. That's very cool. So Gary he used to write a print newsletter, and I believe it's available now, thehalbertletter.com. Hopefully that's right. If not, correct me.
I think it's the GaryHalbertletter.com. I think.
Yeah, edit me out or whatever. Beat me. Anyways, look for it. If you want it,
Gary
earn
Halbert,
it.
yeah.
But so one of his most popular newsletters, he talks about the one thing, the one advantage, and it was really a newsletter that resonated with everybody. And so he talks to his audience and asks them, if you were starting a hamburger stand, what is the one thing, the one advantage that you would want? And people answered stuff like sesame seed buns, the best beef, great fries. And Gary's like, I will give you all of that. All I want is one thing, and I promise you that I will clean the floor with you guys. And I'm paraphrasing, making this all. Yeah, but it's not his exact words.
Yeah, no, that's very good. That's very good. You got it down pat, I think, Jonathan.
Good. And so they're like, all right, so what is the one thing that you want, Gary? And Gary responds to them, a starving crowd, right? Because they don't care. They don't care what beef you got. They don't care anything. If they're hungry, they're buying burgers. And so that's what I would say to anybody thinking about jumping into podcasting. Start with a starving crowd. So instead of thinking about your content, instead of thinking about your mic, by the way, I'm using the same mic I was using in 2009, 2008. People would be disappointed by my setup. Instead of worrying about any of that stuff, just think about the people who you are speaking to. Find out where they're hanging out and listen to them talking so that you can serve them up what they're hungry for.
Right. No, I think that's a very important lesson. And I heard that the first time that Gary, I saw videos of his, I went out and bought Gary products sort of secondhand and so forth, because I think he had passed away by the time I sort of got into everything. But yeah, when I heard that starving crowd thing on the videos, it just really made a lot of sense. And it's so nice to hear it put in such simple terms. I think Gary is a master of, relating those concepts to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Very wise man. Look him up, guys and girls listening.
Yes, absolutely. So once people have decided to just, that's what Carlos and I basically did. We became friends online. We've actually never met in person. And we said we were both into copywriting and doing some copywriting for other people. And so we said, we were having these conversations. We just sort of resonated, our personalities, I guess. And then we decided to just record some of the conversations that we were having anyways and turn this into a podcast. And people can go back to the very beginning. And I hesitate to tell you to do that because the
the coffee shop.
Yeah, exactly. Because I travel full time. So I'm nomadic, if you will. And Carlos is in the process of moving, but he travels a lot too for business, for going to his clients and various conferences and so forth. So we're kind of always in a less than perfect conditions to do the show. So some of that shows up, of course, from time to time. But yeah, if you had sort of this, aside from getting the starving crowd, what are sort of the very basic, things you've heard on podcasts? Certainly for us, it's noise and volume levels and stuff like that. But what are some of the other mistakes people are making?
Well, the first one is the main one. If you get that right, you will be light years ahead of most people who are podcasting. Another one that I would share with you, and I'm pretty sure you don't do this because we've talked a little bit.
Right.
It's all good, though. It's all good. But one of the things that I like to do with my folks that I work with and any shows that I'm on is called the vault. And the vault is the concept of having a vault of content before you launch, because the thing is, it's tough when you're trying to keep up a weekly or however many shows you do schedule and you don't have content to fall back on. So before we ever launch, we like to have at least 8 shows in the vault so that we know we have some runway should anything come up.
Yeah, that's a very important point, I would say. Actually, people, I don't know. I mean, the people that listen to this one already, we sort of got a small but hardcore little group of people that listen to this regularly. But we are not actually even on iTunes yet. By the time this airs, we probably will be.
Yeah, I noticed that. I was looking you up. I'm like, damn, I can't find this anywhere. And I finally found you on YouTube.
Yeah, and one of the things I heard that, I want to hesitate to say years ago and date myself, but it probably was. I'd heard people advocate that, building up episodes before you launched into a more widespread thing. So eventually my first idea was to do like maybe 20, and then sort of iron out a lot of the kinks. I wanted to get it out there so that people could find it and start listening to it, but also not have to suffer through 1,000 "hey, your sound sucks" complaints. So
Yeah.
we got those first 5 or 6 out of the way, and now once we reach 25, we'll be on iTunes.
So you got your vault. You're doing it a different way. You got like a little beta model going.
Yeah, we've tried to, and we've learned this the hard way, I think, in some cases, because we've gotten ahead now. I mean, I think we have 3 or 4. We're a month ahead or something. So
good.
We've learned that lesson too. Where I started, we were scheduling it once a week for a while, but then if something happened, and it did on occasion, we were like, damn, now Carlos and I have to talk,
Right.
So, and we'd rather not work,
So. Sure.
So is that sort of the model that you guys fall under too? Do you record I know someone like John Lee Dumas, I think, was the guy what I was listening to when I first listened to Entrepreneur on Fire. Of course, he was doing ones every day, so I don't know how the hell he keeps up with that. But
and he's 3 months ahead too. That's how he does it.
Oh, there you go. So he's 3 months ahead, and I think he was one of the first person I heard that talk about how far ahead he was. And for him, it's necessary, of course, because they come out every day. But how far ahead do you go?
We try, and it doesn't always work out, but the way I structure things is we try to be 2 months ahead, and then what we do is we record every 6 weeks. And so it makes it super easy on us, easy to come up with content. And it also allows, if anything comes up, if anything changes, if there's a shift, we can take a month off or more and still keep our show delivering.
Right. So you guys record a bunch at once. Is how you go.
Yeah, we do 4, usually 4 at once. That's why we get the vault together, and then we do 4 at a time every 6 weeks.
Awesome. That's great. That is great advice too for people who've never podcasted before and are thinking of jumping in and serving their starving crowd. That is gold right there, because I can attest. There has been some. We record every Monday, of course, as you know, and there's been some tense Monday mornings. As an entrepreneur, I've loved Monday mornings for a while. They've not been my nemesis for quite some time, but once I started this podcast, it became a little more intense.
Surprise!
They're back. So you offer products and stuff for people to start their podcasting careers?
Yeah, I have some training. The thing that I'm really working on and what I'm focusing everything towards nowadays is the Podcast Mogul newsletter. And that's really, it's low cost, it's delivered in print. Like you said, it feels good to wait and have that thing delivered. but it also allows me to keep up. Where if I wrote a book, which I'm too damn lazy to write a book, but if I wrote a book, it would get outdated and I would have that perfection syndrome. And so the Podcast Mogul newsletter allows me to keep up to date and also keep ahead because I've got like 5 or 6 of them written already. But just keep things fresh, keep new ideas coming in, and also, as you know, when you learn stuff, the best thing to do is to write some of that stuff down, internalize it, and then repeat it so that it really becomes a part of you. And so that's really, it's more for me than it is for my subscribers. But it's read in 6 countries, and that's really the focus. I do have other products, but I would say that would be the place to start.
And that's a print newsletter that people gets delivered to people's doors.
Old school, baby, print newsletter.
Gary Halbert style.
That's right. What do you think? I hang out with these guys. I pick up and I know what they're up to. I mean, I have a show with Doberman Dan who studied with Halbert,
right,
who lived with Halbert.
That's another show I listen to. Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I look, these guys teach me, and I'm just like, okay, if that's what we're doing, then we're doing it, and I'm in. That's all. I just take action.
Yeah, and you have learned well by the sounds of it. Yes. So how do people get this print newsletter? Where do they go, and how do they sign up, and what sort of costs are involved and stuff for people who want to jump on this immediately?
The best thing to do is just go over to thepodcastfactory.com, and there'll be a little video on one of my right at the top of the screen. We're having the website redone. Hopefully it's still at the top of the screen by the time you hear this. But there's a video about my podcast launch formula, and it's how to get to the top of iTunes. So you go in, you sign up for that. You'll find out how I got my last 10 shows to the top of iTunes. And I have a formula to make that work. I give it to you. And from there, you'll get daily emails, and eventually you'll get an offer for the Podcast Mogul newsletter.
Awesome. Great. I think I'm going to jump on that myself when I get a chance to decompress after a weekend here. But yeah, that's great. Jonathan, I've been following Jonathan for a while, so and I'm really glad you came on the show because I've been looking forward to this one because you seem to be involved with a lot of people I've learned from personally as well, and I've learned stuff from you listening to Ben's show and some of the other ones you're involved with.
Where they beat me.
Yeah, where they beat you senseless, and I felt a lot of commiseration with your beatings.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been great, and people who want to get into podcasting who write me emails. Instead, write Jonathan. He knows more.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to attempt to slough this off on you.
Yeah. Brush off.
Yeah, he's got something
brush off.
That's factory, exactly. So what can go wrong? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Jonathan, I really want to thank you for coming on the show. It's been a great pleasure having you on the show. I think you've dropped a lot of knowledge for people about podcasting, about business, and about everyone that we've had on the show. If you go back and listen, there is a similar formula here for people, and usually involves failure at some point, unfortunately. But I think that's how you learn. I think that's everyone has taken away some valuable lessons from their own failure. That doesn't mean everyone maybe necessarily has to fail, but I think it probably does. And because it teaches you something that you can't just be told.
You need that. I was trying to look up a quote. I didn't realize that we would be doing that. But it doesn't matter. But really, the thing about failure that you should know is that it's just a part of the game. And get used to it. And the sooner you get used to it, the sooner you'll realize it's just data and it doesn't really affect you. It just helps you make better decisions later. So I want to thank you because I know we had to reschedule a couple times. I want to thank you for having this fun conversation. I've enjoyed it, and thank you for bringing me to your listeners. Hey, listeners, and hopefully it was good for them as it was for me.
I'm sure it was, and I want to thank you again, and it's been a great pleasure. I'd also like to thank Ben Sound at bensound.com for the intro and outro music, and we'll talk to everybody again next Tuesday on the Takeover Tuesday podcast, where Carlos will be back. All right, have a good day, everybody.